under my reign too. My palace you came, I bow down to your highness, cause you know I'm the king.
The twists and turns of the Aaron Rodgers saga continue as we welcome you into NFL Live. I am Field Yates. For the next hour, I will have, amongst others, Tim Hasselbeck, Damian Woody, and Kimberly Martin. We'll get into a lot, including a developing story, and a significant one at that, involving the Washington football team. Of course, more to come on Aaron Rodgers in just a bit. But within the last 30 minutes, we have received news, that courtesy of who else than Adam Schefter, who tweeted just minutes ago about the Washington football team. And Schefter, I'll give you the floor. What more can you tell us here?
Phil, can you hear me?
We got you now, Schefter. Go ahead.
Okay, because basically, I'm sorry about that confusion. Essentially, moments ago, the NFL just handed down a $10 million fine to the Washington football team for essentially the culture that the organization had for years. This was an investigation that a law firm in Washington ran through the NFL. The league has handed down the penalties and come to the conclusion that this is worthy of a $10 million fine, one of the largest fines the league has handed down. We should also point out here, Field, that essentially there were no suspensions. Nobody here was responsible for a loss of a draft pick. So really, the one penalty, and it's a severe hit, is a $10 million fine. Dan Snyder did not get disciplined. And when we look back across time at NFL owners, there have been very few that essentially have gotten disciplined. We saw Jim Irsay, who was charged. We saw Jerry Richardson suffer in Carolina. But very few owners have been disciplined over time. And in this particular case, the NFL sought to impose the fine on the Washington football team. No suspensions, no loss of draft picks, but this was for the culture that they ran. And you'll notice this past week, of course, the Washington football team promoted Tanya Snyder to co-CEO. Not an accident that comes down this week, in a week where the league hands down a $10 million fine against the Washington football team.
Schefter, stand by because we'll come back to you in just a moment for more news. But you mentioned Daniel Snyder addressing this matter. Here is what he had to say in a statement that just was released. I have learned a lot in the past few months about how my club operated and the kind of workplace that we had. It is now clear that the culture was not what it should be, but I did not realize the extent of the problems or my role in allowing that culture to develop and continue. I know that as the owner, I am ultimately responsible for the workplace. I have said that and I say it again. He continues, I feel great remorse for the people who had difficult, even traumatic experiences while working here. I'm truly sorry for that. I can't turn back the clock, but I promise that nobody who works here will ever have that kind of experience again, at least not as long as Tanya and I are the owners of this team. More on this, and that comes from Kimberly Martin, who joins us now. And Kimberly, you previously covered this team for the Washington Post. What's your reaction to this $10 million fine handed down by the league?
Field, I think that sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But I think there's always going to be skepticism when it comes to NFL owners paying this sort of money. That might be pocket change to a lot of owners, as crazy as that sounds. There's also always going to be skepticism when it comes to Daniel Snyder. You mentioned I covered the team before. You know, the stories that we saw last offseason that were written by the Washington Post were not the first. There's always been this cloud around that organization for a long time, and the organization went above and beyond to try to rectify that. They made a lot of new hires, a lot of diverse hires in light of those Washington Post stories, but you know, no owners, from what I gather, no owners were pushing to force Dan Snyder to sell. You know, I think like I said, there's always going to be skepticism with him because these are not new allegations. There's always been this cloud of suspicion and always questions about how things were run internally. So having his wife now take over the day-to-day operations, again, is that a PR move? The feeling is that a PR move, or is this an organization that's really committed to turning the corner? And some people wonder, can it do that with Dan Snyder still as the owner?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, Kimberly, because it feels like, at least from this view in Bristol, that since Ron Rivera was hired as the head coach, the organization has made some progress culturally and seems to be more diverse and more open, and certainly a place that players seem to have a little bit more pride playing for. Do you get the sense that we're heading in the right direction? Understanding this is a big step back in terms of money, but it feels like things are trending in a positive direction.
Yeah, from not just Ron Rivera, Jason Wright, the new president, well, relatively new president. It feels like it felt like a new day last year in a sense. But again, Daniel Snyder being at the top of that org chart, that's where the issue is, and that's where the skepticism lies. Because while they try to steer course, they're separating from Daniel Snyder, except he's still there. Like, that almost feels like the elephant in the room. And I think people down in that region now still have been wanting him to get rid of the team, but that's clearly not going to happen. And as long as he is there, the questions of how could he not know? How could he not have known he was enabling behavior? Because these are not new stories and not new rumors.
Well, keep in mind here, Kimberly, that there were nearly 150 former and current employees of the Washington football team that were interviewed in the investigation conducted by Beth Wilkinson, the Washington attorney that the league hired to do this particular investigation. And there were all sorts of findings. And we look at a team now that is and has been in complete transition. You mentioned all the hires that this team made. We go back to last year and the team dropping its nickname in favor of the Washington football team as it goes on a journey to find a new name for the football team. Dan Snyder stepping away from the day-to-day operations of the team, ceding control to his wife Tanya, who will be more involved. She obviously comes with some rave reviews. She was the one that thought up the breast cancer campaign to raise funds for Think Pink. So she comes with a decorated background, and she will be very much in control of this franchise as Dan Snyder steps aside from all that has transpired with an organization that has been in turmoil but is trying to come out on the other side of it right now.
Seems like we're making some progress down there in D.C., at least a little bit, Schefter, but a big hit to the wallet of Dan Snyder today. But he's not the only person who will owe the NFL some money. A day of discipline's upon us. What more can you tell us about teams that have been fined today?
Field, it has not yet happened, but it's going to happen in a short time. The NFL is going to fine 3 different teams and head coaches for OTA violations. The Jacksonville Jaguars, the San Francisco 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys. My understanding is there had been some inadvertent contact. The NFLPA saw that contact on video, had video evidence, lodged complaints against these particular teams, and there you see the 3 fines in their specifics that were coming down today. The 49ers fined $100,000, Kyle Shanahan $50,000, Jaguars $200,000, Urban Meyer $100,000, the Cowboys $100,000, with Mike McCarthy being fined $50,000. So 3 separate fines that come down. So we've got a $10 million fine for the Washington football team for issues and allegations that are obviously much more serious than some inadvertent contact during OTAs. But on that same day, these 3 particular teams also, along with their head coaches, get hit up for some fines. So look, Field, this usually happens right before the July 4th holiday, right before the lull. The league manages to get in all this news, and it's happening again as we speak.
Nothing like the Friday news dump, though we're just a day in advance of it and ahead of the holiday weekend. Schefter, as always, thanks for making time for us on the fly here today. Great insight and reporting.
Thank you, Field.
All right, more to come here on NFL Live. As NFL Live is brought to you by Summer of Soul. Coming up here in a second, as you hear Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers. We'll talk about them in just a minute. But I was telling you, NFL Live is brought to you by Summer of Soul in theaters and streaming on Hulu Friday.